Before the NFL scouting combine, the Cincinnati Bengals have a clear need at defensive tackle and nose tackle. Let's take a look at the top 3 guys in this class before they test in Indianapolis.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. I'm Jake Liscow, joined today by Mike Santagata at Bengals_Sands to talk about the top defensive tackles in the 2024 draft class. If you're new to the Locked On Bengals podcast, yesterday we talked about what the early tag means for T. Higgins and what's going on with the Bengals salary cap with the $255 million salary cap announcement from the NFL. That episode available to you on YouTube and anywhere you get your podcast. If you're an everydayer already, or you make us your first listen already, we appreciate those good habits and hope to see you again here for the rest of the offseason. And Mike, today we're going to take a look at the top defensive tackles in this class. They're going to test shortly at the combine. We'll have some more information, but based on tape and based on mock drafts, at least we can talk about these guys. And one interesting thing to me, at least, as we start this conversation is the guy that we seem to be higher on so far is a guy that has been increasingly projected as a faller, and we know he's not actually going to test in Indianapolis, and that's Johnny Newton, the 3-tech from Illinois, the defensive tackle from Illinois. So we're going to go through some scouting reports, some strengths, weaknesses, some takeaways from watching their tape. That's where we're going to start, Mike, and I believe he is your top tackle in this draft class, correct?
Yes. Definitely my top tackle.
What is it that makes not Byron Murphy, we're going to talk about him later, Johnny Newton, your top tackle?
So I think as a pass rusher, it's a little bit inconsistent sometimes with his recognition of when the ball is snapped, but he has a good get off. And that's going to be, we're going to talk about Newton too. Or we're going to talk about Murphy too. Oh, goodness, we're getting confused. We're going to talk Murphy too. Murphy's got that too. But what Newton presents is some refined tools to not only win with his get off, but to beat the hands, beat the man to the inside or the outside. I mean, he's got quite a few moves, but the most I saw was a swipe and a club or a swim move in there, try to disengage and come completely clean to get a hit on the quarterback. So you've got those, and then he can also bull rush through the offensive lineman. And then when you talk about that, you're talking inside, outside, and through a guy as a pass rusher. That's what you're looking for. You're looking for a way to beat the guy in front of you all 3 ways. That becomes when it's really difficult to block those guys. And Newton, to me, I know there's arm length questions with him. I saw it a little bit more in the run game than I saw it in the pass game. And I also think to go with those moves, he sets them up well. Some stutters, some hesitations, some jabs, not too much. Not that he never just rushes ahead and tries to win around the outside or through a guy, but it feels to me as if I was a guard, he would be the hardest to block in a pass situation just because he has all of these refined moves already. And I think he's only still 21 years old, so he's not an older prospect that's refined.
Yeah, we've got him at around 21 and a half when the draft rolls around. He's a junior, so still a younger guy, still has room for development, room for growth, listed at 6'2", 295. So those measurements and the arm length, like you mentioned, are going to be critical for him, I think, in terms of how he's perceived in terms of a first-round prospect or a fringe first-round prospect. And there's obviously a type of player there, right? That's your penetrating 3-tech who's going to try to shoot gaps. That's your Geno Atkins size guy that you're hoping can be a Geno Atkins type player. Are there similarities from a play style perspective, from a traits perspective between Newton and Atkins?
I think so, but I get a little nervous about that. The Hall of Fame type of player. I liked because Geno was always low, and I know Newton has some of that natural leverage at 6'2". Reminds me a little bit more of a Javon Hargrave who gets a little high in the run game, who can get swallowed up in the run game more than Atkins could. Atkins, it felt like, didn't really have any issues against the run, where it feels like Newton, not that he's terrible against the run, he can lock guys out, cross face, shed, all that stuff kind of translates over. But just at times, guys that are really long can kind of swallow him up, and he can kind of get high out of his stance. And he does that on his bull rush too sometimes, where he just gets high right out of his stance. It just saps all of his power because now he's not playing with the proper leverage. So I do see the similarities with Atkins being a penetrating 3-tech, having all these moves to win around guys and through them. But actually, kind of like the slightly lower version of Javon Hargrave, who Bengals fans, me included, wanted last year in free agency and was a top defensive tackle on the free agent market. But yeah, I just think some of the pad level stuff and some of the run game stuff makes him feel a little bit less like Geno to me. But maybe that's me putting Geno on a pedestal because I thought he was awesome.
And from an alignment perspective, are you seeing mostly 3-tech alignments from Newton? I'm just looking at his data over at PFF. It looks like there's a lot of 4-eye or even head up on tackles as well in the profile. Is he a guy that you see as versatile in terms of where you could put him? Is he a guy that you're ever putting in that Chris Jones role and saying, hey, you've got a bad right tackle, I'm going to go put Chris Jones over Hakeem Adeniji in the clutch? Is that something that you think is part of his game?
I definitely think 3-tech to 4-eye to even head up, that's fine. To me, that's almost all the same position for the most part.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. But going outside to end, I could see it a little bit. I think that the length hurts him. I think when you're talking about tackles that's where, if he faced Fashanu a few times in the Penn State game, it just felt like Fashanu's length was a deterrent for him, just being able to get hands on him first and kind of stall his rush out. So that would be what would stop me. I don't think that other than that, there's a reason he couldn't do it, but I think of him more as just kind of a B gap player.
So when you're thinking about what makes a first round grade happen for Newton, when you're thinking about why he's your top rated tackle, what traits really speak to you and elevate him into that top spot when you're evaluating this year's class, which we know we're all looking at because the Bengals have a need there?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of the athleticism, age, and then refinement, especially as a pass rusher. I don't think he's bad on rundowns. I feel like I haven't praised him enough there. He does his job, especially upper body strength, lock guys out and whatever. But what makes him my top tackle is just not only is he athletic and young, but he's got some of that refinement to his game where I think day one he could be a plus pass rusher. And maybe he won't be a plus run defender yet, but I think the potential's there to be a good run defender. And the most important thing for the Bengals, in my opinion, might be the pass rush from this 3-tech position, because they kind of have the more run defending 3-tech in BJ Hill. Now, nose tackle, I would be much more worried about his ability to defend the run. But with him being a 3-tech and what they've been missing since Larry Ogunjobi, it feels like he could be a better version of Ogunjobi year one. And that's something that they have missed sorely since Ogunjobi left.
Certainly a name that we're going to be watching. He should have a pro day closer to the draft. I think we will get testing for him. I think that will be important. And if he tests really well, then that's where you can project the athleticism forward too. You can project the strength forward, because when you think about a guy like Geno, it was really the strength for him that separated him. Like, he had the quickness, he could cross your face, he could shoot a gap, but he also could just walk you back into your quarterback and use you as a projectile to tackle your quarterback. And that's a pretty uncomfortable place to be for an interior lineman. So I know you talked about the strength. He had a great pass rush win rate, according to PFF, 15.4%, puts him in like the 95th plus percentile, 75th percentile plus run stop rate as well. So some of the data really strong for him as well. And it's not like Illinois is this powerhouse of a football program. And in the Big Ten, you're generally facing a AFC North style of football, but worse because it's the Big Ten. Last question, real quick. On a scale of Zach Carter to Geno Atkins, where do you rank? Where would you rate the strength and the functional power for Johnny Newton?
Ooh. Yeah. Definitely higher than the first name. But he's not at Atkins level. I do think as a pass rusher, he prefers to win inside outside. It could be violently, but he prefers to win inside outside rather than through a guy. Through a guy is kind of his secondary. So I think it's like a 7.5, somewhere in that range.
That's pretty good. That's still well above average. 75th percentile strength. You take that. Coming up next, let's talk about some of the other defensive tackles in this class. We'll talk about those Texas boys. Byron Murphy, T'Vondre Sweat, a couple of very different style of players coming up next.
This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. A lot of us spend our lives wishing we had more time. The question is, time for what? If it was unlimited, how would you use it? The best way to squeeze that special thing into your schedule is to know what's important to you and to make it a priority. Therapy can help you find what matters so you can do more of it. And whether it's spending more time with your family, whether it's accomplishing your professional goals at work, therapy can help you refocus and recalibrate when you need it. BetterHelp is entirely online. It's designed to be convenient to fit even the busiest schedules. So if you're traveling for work, if you're in and out of hotel rooms, that's okay because it's entirely online. And the questionnaire to get a therapist, well, it takes just a few minutes and you fill out that questionnaire and boom, you get your therapist. And you can switch therapists at any time to find the right fit for you. Learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon.
Mike, let's go Byron Murphy next, the Texas interior defensive lineman who is up to 12th on the PFF big board. And I think by consensus has been rising quite a bit as I think folks are talking more to NFL sources and realizing that the NFL is higher on Murphy than perhaps they were going into the Senior Bowl process. For example, of course, Murphy wasn't at the Senior Bowl. His teammate T'Vondre Sweat was, but a similar sized player, a little bit bigger, but shorter, listed at 6'1", 308, so a little bit more weight to him, about the same age for Murphy and Newton. And similar productivity, similar pass rush win rates, similar run stop rates. One of the big differences is that Texas used Byron Murphy, despite his size that you would project to be more of a three tech in the NFL. They used him a lot in the A gaps. They used him at nose tackle a lot. But let's start big picture. What are your big takeaways when you look at Byron Murphy, and how far apart are you on Murphy and Newton?
I think with Murphy, he has, I think, more potential than Newton just because he does have a tiny bit more length, a little bit more weight, and I think he's actually a little bit more athletic. So starting there, if you are just, and I think some NFL teams will think this, we'll get the most out of him. Like we don't care about the floor so much. We just care about the ceiling. I think you go with Murphy because he has the ceiling to, I think, be even better than Newton will be. And I'm pretty high on Newton's ceiling. I think that Murphy has an awesome get off, an even better get off than Newton. I think the main difference I have between the two is a little bit of refinement things and a little bit of questions with the tape too, because when you talked about his A-gap stuff, well, I don't see him playing there much because to me, he wasn't doing like real good nose tackle things. And it felt more like this guy's out of position. Like he's getting Iowa State film. Not great. He was getting pushed around by those guys. I was like, Iowa State guys? I don't know the center guard combo here, but how are you not able to hold up there? So like maybe we should get you off these double teams and into the B gaps where you can maybe shoot the gap a little bit. Or they slanted him from the A gap, but it was just, I didn't love it. Especially when you have Sweat, who we'll get to, but it's 360 pounds. Like put him at nose. Like why are we putting Murphy at nose and him at three tech? I feel like we're just, I don't understand that. But the refinement thing, I think, shows up when you're talking about his ability to finish. He can maybe achieve the upper hand on a lot of guys, but he's not getting those hands off of him winning clean. So it might get charted as a pressure, might get charted as a pass rush win. But to me, it's not as valuable as what Newton was able to do, where he comes completely clean and is able to put a hit on the quarterback or able to sack the quarterback or come right at him. And the quarterback knows he has to get the ball out rather than just move off of his spot or maybe have to go make something happen off script. I think run game, he's kind of similar to Newton. I think some people have talked about his run game, his run defense as better. And it was weird because I was reading something with his double team. I was like, he goes to a knee. I've never seen that before. Like, everybody does that. What are we talking about? Like, I watched DJ Reed do that 4 times a game. But he does that sometimes. He can stay lower against those double teams. He also got moved by the double teams a lot. And he looked like a 3-tech trying to play nose against those double teams. So to me, I felt like him and Newton struggle against double teams, and they were pretty good when they got soloed up and were able to lock out, crossface, shed, all of those fun defensive lineman techniques. I think the main difference is he's a little bit more athletic, maybe a little bit higher potential, a little bit lower floor to me, a little bit more questions because we didn't see him exclusively at 3 tech. In fact, some games you would see him mostly at nose, shade, 1, 2 eye, wherever, just near the A gaps rather than near the B gaps. So that doesn't feel like where I would use him. And that left me with some questions too.
He also played a lot less than Newton did. Like he had 1,100 career snaps, roughly 1,128 according to PFF's snap counts. And Jerzon Newton the last 2 years is just 2 years, 1,400 in total in his career, well over 2,000 snaps. So Newton a lot more experienced than Murphy, which is interesting. Murphy also a little bit of a late breakout from a productivity perspective. Like he was a fine player at Texas for 2 years. Started his career as a freshman playing more against the run than as a pass rusher. Only had 11 total pressures that year, according to PFF, as a sophomore in his second year at Texas. Played a little bit more. They added 100 snaps of workload for him. He got to rush the passer 60 times more that year than he was out there to defend the run. Ends up with 20 total pressures that year on 226 pass rushes, which is a pretty efficient rate of getting home to the quarterback, but that's still not a ton of experience for Murphy. And then even this year as a junior, plays in 14 games, but only plays 438 snaps. So I guess Texas must just be incredibly deep on the defensive line. We know that they had 2 guys drafted last year, for example, and we know Tavondre Sweat we're about to talk about on this defensive line as well. And they have some young and up-and-coming guys as well, I think, but that split really grew in favor of pass rush snaps. The growth in terms of snap count for Murphy year over year from 22 to 23 was all adding pass rush snaps. And you also really saw the pressure rate take off this year for Texas, where he went from 20 pressures last year to 45 in 2023. And that comes on just 50 more or so pass rushing snaps. So you doubled the pressures on just 50 more snaps. That's a pretty significant jump. So you did see a really significant breakout, I think, for Murphy as a pass rusher this year. And that still comes with 127 A gap out of position snaps, which I'm wondering if that's just like a weird college thing where they're doing weird stuff with their defensive lines and they're keeping him out there in passing downs, but just putting him at nose. And sometimes he's dealing with the run in those situations. And Texas has a bit of a weird rotation going on. We've complained about it back and forth, Mike, when talking about JC Latham, like the kinds of defensive fronts that colleges are using and college offensive linemen have to face are a little bit weird. But I wonder what triggered that pass rush breakout, as it were, for Murphy this year. What's his calling card? How does he most frequently win? Because the pass rush grades really high for PFF, the pass rush win rate even higher than Newton's. He comes in just south of 20%, which for an interior lineman is pretty crazy, especially for a guy with as many snaps at nose as he got. So how does he win as a pass rusher?
Mostly, to me, athleticism, get off, winning around, and some strength in there too. I think he's a strong player. He can turn that speed into power. But most of the time, I believe that I saw him one, and I watched however many games. So maybe there's games where he was looking like a really refined swipe and, rip, dip, whatever move you want to talk about. Maybe he had some of that in there. But the games I watched, it was mostly him being a better athlete and just beating a guy to his spot and being able to just rip through that or run through that contact, or maybe just bull that outside shoulder or inside shoulder wherever he's trying to contact a guy. Also felt like did get a little help from our guy Sweat that we'll talk about with some of the stunts. I think some of those, Sweat is kind of like a pick and roll in basketball. Guy sets the screen, he doesn't get any credit. So you got some open looks that way too. I felt like when I watched Murphy, it actually, weirdly enough, reminded me of Murphy last year, where I'm like, yeah, there's a lot of athleticism here. There's a lot of reason to think that the ceiling is awesome. But when you're picking at 18 versus 28, do you want the guy that's not very refined? And maybe your first year, you're just going like, let's just get him some experience. He should be viable out there. And then we'll get some flash plays. And then year 2, year 3, that's when he can really come on for the team.
It's interesting because of just the trends where he seems to be taking off and on the trajectory for a lot of consensus boards, big boards, to be the number 1 tackle in the class for a lot of folks. And you're sounding cautionary alarms as far as how Murphy would fit as a first round splash player where the Bengals are looking for, or at least we're looking for the Bengals, that first round impact, that ability to hit the ground running when you're picking in the middle of the first round instead of at the end of the first round. Anything else on Murphy before we move on and finish the show with his teammate T'Vondre Sweat, Mike?
No, I think it makes sense when you're talking about climbing up the consensus sports and talking to NFL guys, because I feel like NFL guys really hone in on a ceiling type of thing where they feel like they're just, we'll get the most out of that guy. We're going to turn him into the best version of himself or whoever you could think of for that. So that's where I think some of that comes from. Whereas maybe Newton is not maxed out or anything, but he's a little closer to his ceiling than Murphy is. So you look at that, go like, yeah, Newton could be a really good player, but Murphy, he could be like all pro special type of player.
And what is the ceiling then? You think Pro Bowl ceiling for Newton? Do you think all pro is a ceiling realistically for Newton if you're taking a mid first round pick there? Yes or no?
I think I'm closer to a Pro Bowl ceiling on him, but I wouldn't be that surprised if he turns into an all-pro player. I think that's just the real high. Like, has Javon Hargrave made an all-pro? I don't think so. But like last year, you could have made the case. I think that's where Newton lies, where he's like a Pro Bowl player, and like there's a couple years you could make the case he could be an all-pro.
Let's finish up the show with Byron Murphy's teammate T'Vondre Sweat, the massive nose tackle from Texas, coming up next.
Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. Get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sports book, because right now new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. So throw $5 on the Warriors or throw $5 on LeBron James. You could make a same game parlay if you want to get creative, and that's the beauty is you win that $5 bet and you get $150 in bonus bets to use on quick bets, same game parlays, exclusive props, so much more from college to pro. Baseball's right around the corner. Maybe you're looking at NFL free agency, those Bengals Super Bowl odds for next year, or maybe the NFL draft futures. Well, go to FanDuel now. They're America's #1 sports book for a reason, and you're going to get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet by visiting FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official sportsbook of the NBA.
All right, Mike, there's a clear need for the Cincinnati Bengals at nose tackle. DJ Reader's a free agent. I would feel a little surprised if the Bengals got to the draft and they hadn't addressed this in some way, shape, or form. I don't think you could go into the draft needing a player as specialized as a nose tackle, but when you look at T'Vondre Sweat's last year at Texas, where there were some character concerns, apparently motivation concerns, and then he put it all together. According to people that have talked to his coaches, he's put that behind him. He played 500 snaps, was actually on the field more for the Texas Longhorns in 2023 than his teammate Byron Murphy, despite carrying 60 more pounds, over 360 pounds at 6'4", and has a pass rush win rate that rivals Jer'Zhan Newton, has a run stop rate that blows everybody away. And when you think about DJ Reader, one of the reasons he's so good for the Bengals is because he can affect the passer as well. When you watch T'Vondre Sweat, are there shades of DJ Reader? Is that too lofty to think about for Sweat ceiling?
No, I think it's there. I think you talk about a guy his size, 360 pounds. That's higher. That's bigger than listed Vince Wilfork, than listed Casey Hampton, than like your traditional like, that's a nose tackle. He doesn't move too much, but he's a run stop. This guy moves. He cross-faced a center. He was tilted, whatever you want to talk about. He still had the get off at 360 something pounds to cross the face of the center and get a clean hit on the quarterback. I watched Texas last year for those defensive tackles that I think were day 3 guys. And I remember looking up, like, who's 93? Why are we talking about this guy? I was like, oh, Sweat. Is he coming out? No. Okay, sure. And he wasn't as good last year as he was this year, but just you could still see the movement at the size. It's just rare to me. And now I know that the Eagles just drafted Jordan Davis, kind of had that similar idea where you look at that size and the movement ability. He went first round. And I think Sweat, to me, is kind of a first-round nose tackle where dominant against the run, a good pass rusher, and the ability to get off and move like he can at his size. Now, I don't think he's going to come over with like a 10 RAS score or something. But when you're talking 360 pounds, being able to just put yourself ahead of other guys that are 320 pounds plus. I remember I talked to the Gridiron Gang guys, the Bengals fans that do the draft stuff. I was like, because they listed the defensive tackles by productivity, I was like, oh, Sweat third. Like, where's that compared to 320 plus pound players? They're like, that's rare. Like, that's usually 3 techs only on this list.
Mhm.
It's like, yeah, because you shouldn't win like this. I thought he had some good hands. I think he's more refined than his teammate. I think the pad level, if you're going to talk about a concern there, he's 6'4" and the pad level can get high, but that had no matter at the collegiate level. So I think you might have to work on that. I don't think it's like he can't bend down thing. I think it's just it didn't matter in college. Like double teams, he could just take him on, just throw a guy to the side and go make the stop. I think awesome. He's my kind of player. Nose tackle that can rush the passer. I think that's rare to find. I don't think he'll be BPA when you consider, like how much is he going to play? What's the value of the nose tackle, etc. Mm-hmm. But I mean, my ideal start, if he could fall around 2 with some of those concerns, like, oh man, that is such a great pick, because I think he's a first-round player. And just to me, the special thing just comes from, yes, he's a dominant nose tackle that can stop the run at 360 pounds, but what becomes rare is his ability to move and rush the passer at that size.
Yeah. And what's weird with Sweat is, at least according to PFF's big board, he is way down, like down to 90 on the PFF big board, which is a post-Senior Bowl update, which he had a great Senior Bowl. So that has to come from Trevor Sikkema talking to people in Mobile, Alabama, and getting the feel that perhaps the NFL not as high on Sweat as he was.
Yeah, I mean, I have no idea. I know the first day of the Senior Bowl, I think he didn't have the best day, and then dominated every other day. Like, he just kind of like a wake up, like, they treat this serious. These guys are good. And then just took it to him. I mean, that pass rush rep he had against the Arkansas center, where he just rushed him straight into the ground, that was pretty awesome. Bo Limmer, I think, was his name. I probably shouldn't mention. Bo Limmer got the better of him on the day 1. I remember that. People were talking about it. And then day 2, it felt like Sweat was like, yeah, no, I am that dude. So he showed up.
Yeah, it's not like he's like perfect at the Senior Bowl, but he did notably bend a man in half backward and crumple him on one particular ref, which is a highlight that you will never forget once you've seen it. And if you haven't seen it, go search it up on Twitter. Tavondre Sweat crushes Limmer or bends man in half. Should turn that up. He's 33, by the way, on Dane Brugler's big board that he released about a week ago, 2 weeks ago on theathletic.com. He wrote about Sweat kind of in line with what I just talked about. He's known for immature tendencies as an underclassman. He returned for his super senior season, which is interesting. So we'll have to check on his age. But super senior season in 2023, and made several key changes on and off the field that helped elevate him and answered questions NFL scouts might have had about him. He's also the first Texas player to win the Outland Trophy since 1997. Describes a powerful base that you talked about, Mike. Doesn't get moved by individuals, not to mention, or by double teams, not to mention individuals. And when you think about what the Bengals need, that's where Tavondre Sweat is so appealing. Like, you talk about Brock Bowers as a potential first-round fit who does a lot of the things the Bengals are looking for as a playmaker in that perspective. Or you talk about, I talk about, my personal opinion, J.C. Latham, the things that the Bengals need from a right tackle. When you think about the things they need to replace the productivity they got from DJ Reader when he was on the field, a guy that can consistently affect the pocket by his sheer size. And you have to account for, because he's 360 pounds, you have to game plan for that when you can practically apply that 360 pounds and use it with functional strength. This is a guy that is very, very attractive to me as a draft target for the Bengals. It's just a question of where you would have to pick him. And if the Bengals will be in position to do so, I would imagine the standard deviation for him on NFL boards will be pretty big. There's going to be teams that say nose tackle, I'll get one in the 4th round. There's going to be teams that look at him and say, man, you see what DJ Reader does when he's healthy for that Bengals defense. Tavondre Sweat can be 90% of DJ Reader. Now that's probably worth a premium pick. And so that'll be really interesting.
Yeah, the guy I came to because DJ Reader is just a little bit shorter and can play lower was Dontari Poe, if you remember, at his prime Pro Bowl player, second team All-Pro, like really good player. Not just it kind of fits too because they used Tavondre Sweat on the offensive side. He caught a touchdown, did the Heisman pose, and Poe obviously had that fun passing touchdown, heaviest player to ever throw a touchdown. So they kind of have that funness factor to them, but they're both big guys that can move really well. And that's where I keep coming back to is, man, who can you think of that is this tall, this wide, that can move like that and can hold up? Like, he's not just some unrefined physical marvel. Like, I think he has refinement to him. I think he has the ability to day one be an impact player. That's where I keep coming back to it. And where do you value that? I don't know. And then I think a lot of Sweat is going to be what we talked about too, with the off the field stuff. Like you mentioned he got more serious this super senior season. His senior season, the only award he had, I think, was a second team preseason Big 12 All-American that was going into this year. And then this year, obviously, he won the Outland. He was a unanimous first-team All-American. Like, he obviously put everything together and won just about every award you could win as a nose tackle. Other than as a nose tackle, ever won the Heisman? I don't think he had a shot.
Yeah, no, I don't think so either. But between a great Senior Bowl, a great final season at Texas, and a spotty college career before then, I think that's one of the things that just makes him a very interesting prospect to project in the draft. And like I said, I think the standard deviation on where teams around the NFL evaluate him and grades around the NFL on him will be very disparate. But we'll see how he tests as well. If we get tests for these guys at the combine, going to be fascinating. Does he throw up like the 30 bench press reps or whatever it was for DJ Reader and show off that massive strength on the bench press? What kind of arm length measurement? Well, I guess we have the rest of the measurements. Oh, he didn't weigh in at the Senior Bowl. So does he weigh in at the combine will be another question, I think. You think about DeJuan Jones' fall last year for the way that he treated the Senior Bowl. Now, T'Vondre Sweat didn't leave early, but he didn't weigh in. And so weight, I'm sure, will be a question for Sweat and something that he's working on ahead of his combine weigh-in, which should be later this week. I haven't looked at the combine schedule. It'll maybe be this weekend, but we'll find out in the near future. So we'll be watching all three of these guys. And Mike, we appreciate it. You can go find his write-up on T'Vondre Sweat and a Johnny Newton write-up at allbengals.com. And of course, he's a big contributor to the draft ranking sheet that we work on with Joe Goodberry every year as well, that we'll be putting out closer to the draft. You can find him on Twitter, like I said, at Bengals_Sands. Until next time, thanks for listening to this episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. Hoo day, and have a good one.